Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine war news update for the 16th of April 2024. Thank you very much for your support yesterday. Thanks to Mark for my new, Mark and Olena for my new Ukrainian shirt and the nice scarf for my mitters over there on display. I really appreciate that. Also, please check out the interview I did with Sean Pinner, who was captured and tortured by the Russians. It's on the live tab on the home page to my channel. You can go and check that out. Really appreciated his time with us. There will be a fair bit of content out today. At least the military aid video will be a standalone video, and it will be fairly sizable because there is an awful lot of news and rumour and leaks about the proposal by Mike Johnson for military aid. So there's going to be a lot of conversation about that. Let's get to where we normally start for this video, though. The Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. And you can see that the personnel losses here are higher than they have been. They have recently been about the 800 mark, between 800 and 900. Now we're over 900. There was one day, I think, of higher stats than this in the last week or two, but that is a high number there. 9 tanks, just a smidgen higher than yesterday. 13 APVs and 16 artillery systems are lower, and 1 anti-aircraft warfare system to add to that. 53 vehicles and fuel tanks and no pieces of special equipment. So somewhat lower in a number of categories, and I don't know whether that confirms a speculation I had yesterday in my frontline update, that I think things are sort of fairly much calming down on the front line, apart from certain hotspots where it's really tough for the Ukrainians and the Russians are really pushing. So I think you've got Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Novomykhailivka to Krasnohorivka. Those kind of 3 areas the Russians are throwing everything, but I think in throwing everything they have nothing elsewhere. And I think that means like the whole northeastern axis hasn't moved for 2 weeks plus, maybe 3 weeks. Certainly for the there was a tiny bit of activity around Terney, but not a huge amount. And then southern front line, very quiet, and Dnipro River, no real movement there. So I don't know whether this confirms that kind of speculation. But when we look at Andrew Perpetua's loss statistics, we see what we have seen over the last 3 or 4 days, that the ratio is in favour of the Russians. It's about a 3-to-1 ratio there. And that's what we've seen. The Ukrainian losses are not particularly bad. There's nothing of high value there. Couple of tanks, APC, old APC. Let's talk about them being low on M113s at the moment. There are complaints that they are lacking in some of the basics of their military equipment, the kind of infantry fighting vehicles, APCs. Well, APCs is generally the old APCs to do like medevacs and stuff like that. So there's a call out for them again, but then the rest of these civilian vehicles. So that's a good day in terms of value losses for the Ukrainians. Let's see what the Russians have lost by comparison. Engineering vehicle, tractor, yeah, okay. Some damaged artillery pieces there. Quite a few tanks abandoned and destroyed. A lot of T-80s and T-72s. A mine rolling tank as well thrown in there, and a T-90M damaged too at night. I think that's a significant list, the tank losses, and then the infantry fighting vehicle losses, as we have seen over the last week or so, is pretty bad here. We've seen some insanely long lists recently. APCs as well to add to that, the usual MTLBs, BTR-80, and then we get down to trucks, ATVs, and civilian vehicles. So nothing individually of huge value to the Russians there. It's the mass. That mass is a valuable amount of kit to lose, and I think this goes towards the idea that the Russians are simply losing unsustainable amounts of equipment. And if they are unable to replace that, if they're unable to gear up their military-industrial complex to operate at that level, at a replacement level, then you are going to see their maneuvers, you're going to see their offensives affected by that. Their military behaviour on the front line will be affected at some point. I'd say it already is. So they're already using suboptimal vehicles. We're going to see another example of one of those in a minute. and we are seeing, I think, fewer places where they're attacking, and some anecdotes of units calling out for more equipment. So Andrew Perpetua says, fun fact, since we started our current database on July the 31st, 2023, so that's the way they're doing it much more properly. They were collecting stuff before that, but since they really made it much more consistent, so there's comparable data, we have 12,507 vehicle entries. We also have losses from prior to them, but they are stored on a crappy format that's obnoxious to search. This also doesn't count vehicles we found on high resolution images, but don't have video from the ground. And it doesn't count the 700 vehicle backlog I haven't got through because I have no time. So wowzers, that's your bare minimum of vehicles lost, 12,507 since July last year. I say since July, some of those might be vehicles that have been blown up previous to that and are left and are still just sitting there, and you see on images, and so you build up that data. So it's difficult to know how much you can add to the 12,507 to give a complete picture for the losses since the beginning of the war. But I think the takeaway from that is the Russians have lost an absolute bucket load of equipment. We're going to talk about a couple of drone nuggets here. Andrew Perpetua discusses the Baba Yaga. These are the octocopter vampire drones, but there's a bit of an umbrella term at the moment for all of those kind of drones. There is a variety of those drones that do broadly the same thing, and it's very difficult to tell when you see the images of them what they are. You can tell apparently by the interface that the controller sees on the screen, but unless you know how to differentiate them, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, these are kind of octocopters.
Ukraine set up an ambush for their Baba Yagas. They had a whole bunch of them. It looked like there was like 8 or 12 Baba Yagas all flying in one spot.
Wow.
And when the Russians marched their infantry up, all the Baba Yagas just dropped all their bombs at the same time and wiped everybody out in like 2 seconds. And just took out an entire platoon of infantry in like 2 seconds. And the Baba Yagas flew home. The end.
So that's incredible. You've got essentially carpet bombing from Baba Yagas dropping, because these things can carry multiple munitions or a single much bigger munition or whatever combination thereof. They can drop, and I've seen ones where they're just going, and effectively it almost looks like a smaller version of those World War II images you see from the bombers dropping bombs as they go over, but on a much kind of lower, smaller scale. But they have that effect where you imagine you get 8 to 12 of those things just dropping incendiary thermobaric munitions or whatever they are down on, or just simple, large grenades, IEDs, on an array of troops below. And you're thinking, my goodness, you can indeed wipe out a platoon in 2 seconds, as is evidence there from what he's seen from the footage. So really effective. What you'd want as Ukrainians, because the Russians are genuinely scared of the Baba Yaga. They have this kind of mythic quality, I think. What you want is the Ukrainians to continue having that advantage. Right, moving on to other strike. Actually, no, I've got some other drone news before I get there. Let's keep with the drones. Here we have another video from Magyar, who is the guy that's in charge of the very famous drone unit operating predominantly. I don't know if he has jurisdiction beyond the area he is in. He's in the Krinky area, but certainly his guy's doing a lot of damage around there. This is a video of a drone that flies into a covered area where an artillery piece is. So it's not the greatest resolution and quality video, but I just want to show you what you can do if you're a good drone operator that wants to exact the maximum toll on any given piece of equipment. So you've got the piece of artillery actually pointing out towards us. He's flying inside the kind of shack that the piece of artillery is in, very slowly inching forward, doesn't want to hit the roof with his own propellers, turns around and then is trying to work out where to go for, and then wants to go right down that barrel. It goes up, just getting bearings here, looking around. Yep, okay. I want to just go and explode in that right at the beginning of the barrel there, or right on the parts of the top. Anyway, just I thought it was interesting. There's more evidence, more examples of that. Just the skills that some of these drone operators have, and their ability to pinpoint accurately hit bits of kit is quite incredible. Drones aren't always successful. Sometimes, I mean, it's great in Ukraine at the moment because even the nature is fighting back against the Russian imperialism. Here we have some birds, Ukrainian birds, magpies, attacking a drone and giving it a bit of a hard time. Hopefully they won that battle. But there you go. Good to see the wildlife fighting back. Right, let's go back to some other losses, this time more here for Russia. A Ukrainian SBU has destroyed a Russian Nebo-U radar in the Bryansk region of Russia with kamikaze drones, according to SBU sources. So I don't know if there's any video evidence of this, but their claim is that they've taken out what is worth $100 million. This is the sort of thing that if that one piece of kit was on this list, it would easily take over, it'd be like 3 times the amount of kit, maybe more, that you see from the Ukrainian side. So it's just a massive loss for the Russians in terms of monetary value. But as I often say, it's not just about monetary value, it's about the functional value and the loss that has in terms of capabilities for any given side. So the $100 million long-range radar allowed Russia to track flying missiles and planes 700 kilometers into Ukraine. That's exactly the sort of piece of kit that Ukraine will want to be prioritizing for targeting. And this is talking to the idea of being desperate and having lost more equipment than they would like and being forced to do things like this. So this is another Russian turtle tank with metal plates. I mean, it just looks like it's being made of corrugated iron taken from a shed. Russian turtle tank clad with metal plates and electronic warfare systems spotted again near Krasnohorivka. On the one hand, I laugh at this because it seems ridiculous that they're having to go to this stage of being forced to concoct these vehicles. On the other hand, you think, if it works, I mean, if that has effective electronic warfare countermeasures, and if that corrugated iron really does stop drones getting through, then okay, it might look silly, but it might actually do a job. Then the flip side to that is, well, actually, that turret that's poking out the front certainly can't rotate. So this is possibly another vehicle that is damaged to the point where they can't, for some reason, they can't fix a turret, or is better to do something like this to the vehicle than to fix the turret. I don't know. I mean, it's not ideal for the Russians, but I guess if you've got a vehicle that can't be fixed, or you are unable to fix it, then might as well do something like that to it. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Right. Going through, then we go to Zelensky, who says Ukraine will not have a chance to win the war without the assistance of the United States. This is an ongoing saga, and Zelensky is much more formally getting involved here, which means that he's, I think, desperate. He's willing to say things that are a little bit risque, just to say, this is the reality. We ain't going to win without that stuff. We desperately need that stuff. I'm not going to walk on eggshells around that idea now. And in fact, more of that to come later in the next video. The artillery ratio on the front today is 1-10. So we've heard it's 1-6, 1-7, different kind of numbers. He's now saying it's 1-10. Whether his claim is the reality, I can't verify that. But he says the aviation ratio is 1-30. Now, I said this the other day, well, not that, but I said, look, here's a Hammer AASM 250 French Hammer guided glide bomb that's being used wherever it was. I don't know, Krasnohorivka, wherever it was. I was saying this is really good to see them use this. This is a really effective bomb, and that's awesome. But just remember, in me showing you this, there will be another 70, Russian bombs dropping up and down the front line, or whatever the number is. Well, here the number is 30. So I presume this is only for guided glide bombs, aviation ratio. For every one that the Ukrainians are dropping, the Russians are dropping 30. And those bombs are big. And those bombs are what lost Avdiivka. So that is arguably even more significant than the 10-to-1 artillery ratio. You could argue. I think you can make a good case for that. And talking about those carb bombs, those guided glide bombs, War Translated here says, the opponent, I repeatedly quote, acknowledges the effectiveness of precision-guided bombs, carbs, despite occasional technical issues. So sometimes they do miss, sometimes they don't explode, or whatever the issues are. But he highlights their capability to inflict significant damage and aid ground advancements. However, he stresses the need for better integration of air and ground operations and suggests exploiting Ukrainian air defense weaknesses through tactics like reconnaissance and helicopter dismount landings for breaking through defenses. Overall, unfortunately, the situation with Russian air domination is only getting worse. So this is talking to the issue that the Ukrainians have. There is at the moment, no good answer for the Russian use of these bombs, and they are increasingly eking out that advantage and using them to effect on the front line. That is one of the most important things that the Ukrainians do something about at the moment. That's priority number one, I think. Yes, artillery shell hunger is absolutely critical, but they've got to do something about those guided glide bombs, and that's why I think air defenses are really super important, because they need them not only for the defense of their key installations and targets around Ukraine, but they need them to shoot down those planes on the front line. So last night, another relatively quiet night in terms of Shaheeds and missiles, which again, I think confirms this idea that the Russians are firing at the rate they can produce or procure them. Otherwise, you would have seen subsequent hits. I think night after night, you wouldn't just go, we've really crippled your energy infrastructure, and now we're just going to let you have some time off to try and fix it back up. You'd be going and going. But I think that the fact that they don't do that goes to this idea, as I keep saying, you would if you could, you aren't, so you probably can't. And that's how I see that. Anyway, 9 out of 9 Shaheed shot down is good. It's brilliant interception rates. Russia has fired and continues to fire on Sumy, often with guided glide bombs. So this is in Krasnopil. I don't know what... It could be artillery, though, as well. I don't have any more details. But anyway, Sumy is constantly being battered across the border from Russia, and local Telegram channels yesterday reported an explosion in Poltava. Don't know the details of that. Nothing else I've seen has come out concerning that, but that's within Ukraine, so that's the Russians hitting Poltava. And then in Crimea, missile attack on a command center. So remember, I left you with there are presently missiles going into Crimea. No real details about them and what happened, other than that a command center where senior Russian officers were located was supposedly hit in Crimea. I guess we'll have to wait and see if any other detail does come out. Now, talking about the Tripilska or Tripilia thermal power plant that was basically completely destroyed the other day in the Kharkiv to the south of Kyiv. When we had that massive attack of missiles and drones, and they used a number of these Kh-69 missiles and Kinzhal missiles, and a lot of those got through. Well, Zelensky himself says there were different claims. There was a claim that 5 missiles hit that power station and took it out. Zelensky's now saying they sent 11 missiles at that power station, and the Ukrainians did manage to take out 7 of them, but 4 hit the power station, according to him in an interview with PBS in the US, or with the US media source. The president noted that 4 remaining missiles destroyed the thermal power plant, because then the air defense missiles to protect the plant ran out. At a Tripilska station, the light in the Kyiv region depends on it. 11 missiles flew. The first 7 were destroyed. 4 destroyed Tripilska. Why? Because there were 0 missiles. We ran out of all the missiles that defended the power plant. So yeah, a bit of detail on that. This really would normally be, and it is going to be, in my military aid segment, but just because it gives an indication of potential strikes for Ukraine going forward. This year, Ukraine will both extend the range of its R-360 Neptune anti-ship missiles. So the Neptune was the one that supposedly took down the Moskva, the Russian flagship that was in the Black Sea that sunk early doors. They're increasing the range to 1,000 kilometers and increasing the production of it tenfold. And there's actually maps of it where it can hit on land. So the idea is, one of the rumors is, you can use that to hit targets on land. The Russians have been using anti-ship missiles routinely to strike on at land targets. The only issue is that it's very easy to navigate over flat sea when you're using the same kind of navigation tools to navigate over land, and the topography and buildings. Things can confuse those missiles, and if it's not got an adapted navigation system, then it can end up going into big apartment blocks like it did in Dnipro, as the Russians have used these missiles and either purposefully targeted civilian infrastructure, or it's hit civilian infrastructure because it's the wrong missile to use in that context. But anyway, you could hit an awful lot of places behind the line. So this could be used, essentially, this is what we've been talking about quite a lot, which is the Americans and other nations said, right, we are going to give you weaponry, but you can't use it for X, Y, and Z reasons. But what's been happening at the same time, I think, probably under the scenes, is that those same countries have been going to the Ukrainian industrial military complex and saying, by the way, here's how to build your own missiles. So if you do want to hit those targets, you can do it with your own missiles, and we're going to help you by giving you technology to do that. I don't know if that's happening. That's just completely my speculation. But this could well be the end result, which is, and here's a missile that can fire 1,000 kilometers. It's a decent missile, and you're increasing the manufacturing capacity tenfold. Then you can use these, and they are way better than the ATACMS in terms of range. And you can, I don't know, are they good enough to take out the Kerch Bridge, at least somewhat? Are they good enough to go into deep into Russia and hit oil refineries? Who knows? But this is, if it's true, massively significant. This is huge. That's been reported by Congressional National Defense Strategy Commission following a visit to Ukraine and meetings with Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries, Alexander Kamyshin, top-notch guy. So we're going to talk a little bit about the strikes on oil refineries. There's still lots of conversations going on about this. There are broadly, a couple of theories as to why the US doesn't want Ukraine to hit these facilities. One theory is the economic theory, that it pushes up oil prices in the US or around the world, and no one wants inflation. So inflation's bad, don't do it, because then our electorate will get annoyed that you're doing that, and you will lose popularity. Then there's the version of that, which is also, it's an election year for Biden, and one of the biggest things is inflation, the economy, but really inflation. If your support of a nation if your support of a nation helps them to prosecute an offensive on Russia, irrespective of the morality of it all, that directly pushes up the prices, that hurts the pockets of your voters are not going to vote for you. And then you get really interesting ramifications here, which is because it looks like, although Ukraine were really annoyed that the US has said this, they have actually stopped hitting oil refineries. So it appears to have worked, unless they just run out of stuff to do it with. Now, this is my calculation, again, speculation from me, is that Zelensky probably thinks, right, of the two leaders, I want Biden in, because Trump, we know, I've done whole videos on Trump and his approach to Ukraine, and Zelensky doesn't get on with Trump. And so it's like, right, what I want out of November 2024 is Biden winning, and hopefully a trifecta. If that happens, we are going to get more stuff, and we have a greater chance of winning the war. So he's making a calculation that pissing off Biden, and actually really Biden's electors, the electorate, is worth more or not doing that is worth more than taking out Russia's oil refineries and the effect that will have on Russia's ability to make money and prosecute the war. Those are your two things. And actually, even though that may be really effective and doing a really good job of hammering the Russian pocket, is more important to have the US on side. And there you go. Now, there are arguments that actually it won't affect international oil prices, refined oil prices that much. There is that. And then there's the other one, which is what I shared with you the other day, which I think has a lot of purchase, is the big oil lobbying behind this. So there are two corporations, Chevron and ExxonMobil. I think Chevron has a GDP that's well over twice the entire Ukraine GDP, and ExxonMobil has has a greater GDP, if you like. Its profits are double, or I don't know if it's its turnover is much bigger than Ukraine's GDP as well. So one point I'm trying to say is these two corporations are essentially bigger, economically speaking, than Ukraine by a considerable margin. And so if they are being badly affected by the strikes on oil refineries because they rely on Transneft, a Russian entity, to get their oil out of Kazakhstan, and if the Russians are putting pressure on these guys to lobby the US government because otherwise they don't make a shed load of money, then that is going to have more of an effect than Ukraine saying anything in terms of pure economic heft. And so these two corporations going back to the US and lobbying the government, which we know happens anyway, like the lobbying of the fossil fuel industries is famously massive, then that is going to have, I think, an incredibly large effect on what American politicians then say to Ukraine. So any one of these things are possible, or possibly all of them are possible, right? But then we hear this new when Kamala Harris met privately with Zelensky in February. She told him something he didn't want to hear. So this is going back to Feb. Refrain from attacking Russian oil refineries, a tactic US officials believed would raise global energy prices and invite more aggressive Russian retaliation inside Ukraine. So this is a whole price increase inflation argument. The request irritated Zelensky and his top aides, who view Kyiv's string of drone strikes on Russian energy facilities as a rare bright spot in a grinding war of attrition. Zelensky brushed off the recommendation, but in subsequent weeks, Washington reinforced the warning in multiple conversations with Kyiv, including by Jake Sullivan, who traveled to Ukraine's capital in March. Instead of acquiescing to the US request, Ukraine doubled down on the strategy, striking a range of Russian facilities, including on April the 2nd, attack on Russia's third largest refinery, 800 miles from the front. The incidents have exacerbated tensions in an already strained relationship that come as Biden ramps up his re-election campaign amid a 6-month high in oil prices. Defenders of Ukraine's strategy accuse the White House of prioritizing domestic politics over Kyiv's military goals, and the real politic of the situation is you've got to do that, because Biden doesn't get back in if the electorate haul him over the hot coals, so to speak, over fuel prices. So this is the reality of doing politics, is that, yeah, we really want to support Ukraine, but these guys on the ground in my country broadly don't care about as much of Ukraine as we do up in the political ivory towers, where we have a view of the geopolitics of the whole world. These are people getting on with their daily lives, and if their fuel prices go up at the pump, they're going to blame the government. And so, that's realpolitik. US officials say the rationale behind their warnings is more nuanced than the critics suggest, noting that Moscow's counterattack has hurt Ukraine more than the refinery attacks hurt Russia. And that's my point, is Ukraine are going to have to work out what hurts them more. Yeah, we can gain from striking the refineries, but it hurts us in terms of support from the US and how it lands with the economic argument and the electorate. So the Foreign Minister Kuleba has responded to US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin over criticism of Ukrainian attacks on oil refineries, saying when a refinery explodes in Russia, it creates problems in the Russian energy market and not globally. I mean, at most, Russia exports their refined product exports are 1 to 3% of the global market, so it will affect it only very minimally. So that's why I think the big oil lobbying thing is actually probably more likely to be what's going on behind the scenes. Ukrainians are dying without Patriot systems. Does this concern anyone? Kaleba asks. So yeah, I think this argument will rage on, but keep in mind that big oil lobbying argument and the details about the pipelines in Kazakhstan and whatnot, because I really do think that's incredibly important. Right, staying on this subject a little bit now, going into straight up geopolitics. Russia is considering a return to producing low quality gasoline to make up for shortages caused by Ukrainian attacks on oil refineries. However, this is likely to cause damage to vehicles, which owners may find difficult to repair due to a shortage of spare parts. Reuters and the Russian newspaper Kommersant report that the Russian government is considering temporarily suspending the environmental standards to enable gasoline to be produced at lower quality, or to include environmentally damaging octane boosting additives. Since 2016, Russia's only allowed the production of at least Euro 5 standard gasoline, a standard set by the European Union, which is also in effect in a number of non-EU and Asian and South American countries. Modern vehicles are designed to run only on compliant fuel. Most of Russia's oil refineries were built in the 1940s and 70s, and a number were modernized in the 2000s, increasing Russia's gasoline output and quality. However, the Ukrainian campaign appears to have disrupted several of the most modern refineries. According to Reuters, the Ukrainian attacks have reduced Russian gasoline output by an estimated 14%. In response, the Russian government is reportedly exploring options to roll back standards to enable outdated but intact refineries to make up the shortfall. Russia is reportedly considering increasing the amount of octane in its gasoline by adding toluene and the environmentally damaging monomethylaniline, MMA, which was banned in 2016. However, as experts have noted to the Russian outlet agency News, this would have highly damaging effects on vehicles. John Heitsier of Russia's National Automobile Union says low-quality gasoline will seriously reduce the service life of engines, especially diesels. Quote, when one of the experts say that we have few cars with Euro 6 fuel, he is deeply mistaken. We have a lot with Euro 5 and quite a few with Euro 6. Well, we probably have nowhere to go. We'll have to drive, but we will have to prepare for not the most pleasant times. End quote. A Skoda repair specialist says that, quote, most likely there will be problems with burnout of pistons, valves and other elements. The fuel will burn poorly, continue to burn in the exhaust manifold, and the temperature there will be significantly higher than it should be. All catalyzers may burn out, causing the lambda probe to read incorrect readings that will go to the engine control unit, and then it goes in a circle, errors, unstable functioning, and so on. The Skoda specialist suggested that the situation might end up being like that in Uzbekistan, where the antiquated Soviet-era normal 80 low-octane fuel is still widely used. They use gasoline like our old 80 on modern engines, especially in Skoda Kodiaq cars. Pistons burn out in almost every second car with a mileage of 40,000 kilometers or more. Replacing damaged components is likely to be more difficult and expensive due to the effect of sanctions, particularly for Western-made vehicles. Common sense suggests that the proposals are unlikely to be accepted due to the amount of harm they could cause. That's one issue. But then we hear this today from Euromaidan Press saying Russia has been able, Russia's been able to swiftly repair some of the critical oil refineries hit by Ukrainian drones. Since 2024, Ukraine has initiated a series of drone strikes targeting Russian energy infrastructure, including several major oil refineries, but could be that the repairs are easier to do and more quickly as well. So we shall see what happens there. Right, I missed this. It came out just after I did my video yesterday, but another dam's broken in Russia. Dam at Tomsk has been washed away with a strong water flow. The water level at the Tom River near Tomsk will continue to rise in the coming days. So this adds to the huge issues with flooding that the Russians are experiencing, and then the knock-on effects of costs, energy, time and resources and effort put into sorting out all of those issues, and money that has to be diverted away, one would presume, from the military project, or at least other parts of society. If you're going to keep the military project going with the same funding, then you're going to have to take awful lots of money from somewhere else, and then that means that those areas are going to be lacking in financing, which means that you will have a higher level of discontentment among the Russian population. So it's just a big problem for Russia, and I think they are suffering in so many different ways at the moment, largely as a result of entirely as a result of complete mismanagement of their country over the last ever. Right. Construction of new power units has begun in Khmelnytsky, according to Enerhoatom. The Minister of Energy stated that construction of power units 5 and 6 was started using American Westinghouse technology. Now, I mentioned this yesterday. I just want to add to a bit of analysis there that Ukraine need to keep the power on, right? And if Russia hits power stations, non-nuclear power stations, then and they can take out a power station once a month, then eventually Ukraine are going to have no power other than nuclear power stations, and that's because the Russians won't hit nuclear power stations because it will be entirely highly controversial, and it would start the West coming to Ukraine's aid massively because Russia would be starting essentially a nuclear war. There'd be sort of, I don't know if you can call it weaponizing nuclear here, but it would be not cool, obviously. So the Ukrainians can, if they can ramp up their output of nuclear power, then they can hopefully overcome the shortfall from non-nuclear power energy that is much more susceptible to being hit by the Russians. That's one option. The other option is doing renewables, actually, because renewable power stations are often things like solar arrays or wind turbines that are much more difficult, I think, to... I don't know. I think it's easier to hit just a single unit, like a power station with missiles. And if you can spread your energy production wider, smaller and wider, and you can then argue that actually it's a good idea to go down to micro production of energy. Now, that's a much longer term thing. It's not something you're going to be able to sort out in a year, right? Rather than building a nuclear reactor, you can get, that's just a single project, get that up and, let's build this really quickly and get that done. But I think going forward, this is an opportunity for Ukraine to get some energy security by actually diversifying and sort of going smaller scale, maybe. Robert McKay has reached out to me as one of the followers of my channel. He says, look, I've invented a cheap way of being able to convert water wheels into energy with, the mechanics of that I don't really understand. But the idea, he's a part of a movement that wants to do that in the UK. It's like, if there's so much, if you look at all the old water mills all around the UK that used to use that power to grind flour, then you can just use that to create energy now, and the infrastructure is broadly somewhat there. You have to obviously upgrade and rebuild here and there, but like the potential to generate energy just from like flowing rivers where you're just using the water cycle and gravity is incredible. Actually, there's far more energy there, and so that's the sort of thing you can do in Ukraine. But again, that's a 10-year plan. So anyway, there are options, but the point is that they are going to be forced to move production away from big energy, heat and power stations, and they're going to have to go to nuclear or diversified to smaller stuff that if you hit it, it's going to be too expensive for them to hit, or it will only be able to take out certain amounts, and you can just have, infrastructure that can get around individual hits. Like, okay, you've taken down a single wind turbine, well, we've got another 50 bully for you type thing. So those that's my speculation of what the options are. Okay, Reuters is reporting that in Ukraine, concerning the grain corridor, the Russians and Ukrainians and Turkish, I believe, almost came to an agreement in March. I believe it was the Ukrainians that walked away from it, actually, for one reason or another. Ukraine and Russia negotiated for 2 months on a deal to ensure the safety of merchant shipping in the Black Sea. Reached agreement on a text in March, but Kiev pulled out the talks at the last minute, according to Reuters on today, actually, citing 4 unnamed people familiar with the matter. So I don't know the details. I'm sure there would have been pretty good reason for them doing that, because actually it's hugely important they do have a grain corridor. But they seem to have got around that problem with their corridor that goes down the edge of the Black Sea, the western coastline, outside of international waters and into the waters of those nations. Russia has reportedly fired the 18th Army commander Marzorev and the commander of the 70th Regiment for their failure to retake the territories around Kherson's Krinky and Zaporizhzhia's Robotna that Ukraine reclaimed during the 2023 counteroffensive. So that's interesting. So that's an admission that they failed in two places to do what they were expected to do, which is to take back that whole salient that Ukrainians had taken south of Orikhiv, but also to dislodge the very few Ukrainians on the left bank of the Dnipro River at Krinky. ISW, however, reports that Russian forces may achieve threatening gains west of Bakhmut if US aid to Ukraine is delayed. So they're kind of adding on to what Zelensky himself has said, quote, Western military assistance is vital to defend against Russian expected major offensive in May and June. Ammo shortages are degrading Ukrainian ability to repel intensified Russian attacks. And that's your lot for the first video. There's a lot to go through today. Sorry, it was slightly longer than normal. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.